We're now joined by international counter-terrorism expert David Otto. David, good to chat to you again. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me once more. Thank you.
So, is this a surprise, the deployment of Wagner soldiers into Mali to help fight jihadists?
I think, first of all, we have to be very clear. I know that the U.S. State Department has made mention of the Wagner Group. But again, I've said this before, there is no such existing group as Wagner. I think what the U.S. is referring to is Russian-backed, military personnel. Now, what we have to be very clear, again, is the fact that should there be this kind of a deployment, it will be a bilateral agreement between the Malian interim government under Assimi Goïta and the Russian government. We haven't seen any evidence either from the Malian side or from the Russian side that there is any agreement being made between Wagner, which of course doesn't exist. It's just used to refer to Russian troops and the Malian government. But I think what is very clear here is that there is a geopolitical battle ongoing, as you mentioned in your introduction. We've seen similar chaos happening in Central African Republic, and there is a very strong concern that Russia is also pushing in its influence, against the influence of France in Mali. But we have to be very clear that France is not leaving Mali. What they are doing is they are downgrading their forces. Previously they were in Kidal, they left Kidal, then they downgraded their forces from Tessalit, and now from Timbuktu, which was the area where the French Operation Barkhane was launched in 2013. So by no means is France, leaving Mali completely, because they are contributing about 3,000 forces around the Liptako-Goma region of Gao, alongside with British forces and, of course, the European Union forces known as Operation Takuba. So it's still difficult to say that the French is leaving.
All right, let's talk about these Russian troops then. Are these Russian soldiers that will be deployed wearing Russian uniforms, Russian colors, or is this some deployment that's backed by Russia?
I think there are two ways of looking at this. When there is an agreement between two countries, a bilateral agreement for forced deployment, the decision in terms of how the operation is going to be conducted is entirely up to the host nation. So, for example, if Mali requires that these forces should be dressed in Russian kit, then that will be the agreement between Mali and Russia. If they then decide that somehow they want them to blend with the Malian forces and put on Malian military fatigue, then that is down to the terms of the agreement. There is no some kind of an agreement set on stone that the Russian troops have to be dressed in Russian military fatigue, or they have to be dressed in other fatigues. It's down to the agreement that will be made. But as we've seen in the case of Central African Republic, these troops have been seen with Russian fatigue, and that may be the same kind of agreement that they may have. If then there is any other group that is dressed in some other kind of uniform besides the Russian or the Malian military fatigue, then it's another area to look into. But what I know for sure is that there is an ongoing bilateral talks between Mali and Russia to deploy forces against the insurgency, especially with the fact that France is pulling back its forces from very strategic locations like Timbuktu, in Kidal, where they've been accused of supporting jihadists, and also in Tessalit. So again, I have to stress that it's down to an agreement between the two countries.
What do you think has inspired Mali to look to the east and seek Russia's assistance?
I think it's very clear. I mean, if you remember, less than a decade ago, that was in 2013, there was a great euphoria by Malians when French troops, entered and marched their boots on ground to fight against what was then the separatist Azawad movement in the north, which was threatening to destabilize Mali under then President IBK, that's Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Now, if you look, over the decade, what we've seen is that there hasn't been any improvements in terms of the, the fighting of the jihadists. I mean, what we've seen is that these so-called Azawad movement has now metamorphosed into Al-Qaeda groups. Now we've seen also Islamic State of the Greater Sahel having a very strong hold in Mali. We've seen issues of human rights abuse by the French. They were accused in Kidal by Malians of, directly aiding and abetting militia groups, which were, some have termed as terrorist organizations. This was made very clear by top Malian officials very recently. But also we've seen, issues where, Malians are accusing France of recolonization strategy. So, for example, France says that it will pull down its forces from 5,000 initially to about 3,000. But again, we know that some of these forces are still going to be stationed in Gao. And a lot of Malians see this as rather a movement from one location to another, rather than a pull out of Operation Barkhane. And they're saying that France is living through the window and coming through another door. So, there's still that dissentment. People have spoken about the fact that jihadist movements are ready to negotiate with the government of Mali, unless, if, of course, the French leave Mali, whom they are accusing of actually putting, more, petrol into the fire, so to speak. So, things have not been the same. We've seen 2 military coups during the presence of French operations in Mali. So there is a lot of talk that Mali needs a change. And that is why I think that the Malians are looking for an alternative. And if that is Russia, it is down to Malians to make that decision. And if they believe that it might help them. But I don't think Russia will do a better job. What I think is that Malians need to develop with the Union country to deal with the issue in the region.
All right. I'm just wondering if France then still has a presence in assisting Mali with its insurgency problem. If the Russians come in, does that then create a situation where Russia and France are working together with Mali?
It will be very chaotic, I have to say, as we've seen in the case of Central African Republic, where the Russians are accusing the French of aiding and abetting the rebels under, Bouzizi. The French are accusing the Russians of atrocities. And then, what happens is that the Central Africans are the ones to suffer the most of the casualty. We will see a repeat of the same scenario if Russia signs a bilateral agreement with the military junta under Assimi Goïta. There will be a geopolitical strategy to secure very powerful areas where there is minerals by both France and Russia, and it will be at the detriment of Malians and the resources in that country. I mean, you've got to remember that we also have Mali included as part of the G5 Sahel, which is partly sponsored by the European Union, but also mostly by France. And then let's not forget the European Union Operation Takuba, which France is going to play a significant role in its operations. So there is a lot going on already. Let's not forget the UN has a mission already in Mali where it's deployed its forces for peacekeeping. So all these units, talking about possibly the presence of Russia, the presence of France, the presence of Operation Bakken in some ways, Operation Takuba, again, as I mentioned, the G5 Sahel, and also MINUSMA, which is the United Nations mission in Mali. This is too much, and it will set a lot more confusion and a lot more chaos in the fight against insurgency. So I think, there has to be some kind of a review of the international, collaboration and, interventions in Mali. All this is causing operational confusion, and it is not helping to, eliminate the major threat, which is Al-Qaeda and ISIS. What we've seen in the past decade or so is an increase, in the presence of these groups, spreading across the Liptako-Goma region with Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Niger, Republic, but also right down to Nigeria. So it's not helping, I have to say. What we need to see, again, I have to repeat this, is that Mali needs to take charge, the regional states need to take charge in order to, clamp down on all these chaotic operations that are taking place in the region.
All right, perhaps finally, let's end where we started, the US's concern. What's in it for the United States that they should express concern when the issue really is about fighting terrorism?
I think, the US has, the sovereign right to speak of other nations. But, when you look at the operations that they conducted themselves in Afghanistan, there is very little success there by US own assessment. The same operations that they conducted or they are conducting in Somalia have not also succeeded. I think the French are trying to copy that. And therefore, we will see very little success in that. The US alarm, that is raising in Mali, it's not very helpful to Malians, because of course the question is, what is the kind of lessons that one can copy from the US that has shown some success, and it's very difficult to find any. So I think what is best for Malians, should be the priority here. It is not about geopolitical strategy, because again, the Taliban are back. Al-Shabaab is still there in Somalia since the 90s. Since the French, came to Mali for these, counterinsurgency operations, we have seen actually an increase in jihadist presence. Let Malians, make a decision who they want to partner with, and if that, will be the most effective solution. But I stress that irrespective of who Malians want to partner with, be it Russia, France, or America, or any other country that is interested in Mali, the results will not change. Malians need to stand up for themselves, much so aided by the African Union, if they too want to do that. All the solution has to be local. The US, France, Russia, whatever they say, it's, not going to have any ground impact, as far as the counterinsurgency operations are concerned.
David Otto, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the program tonight.
Thank you.